Hello and welcome to the third chapter of this e-learning course on climate action, built and cultural heritage in Indian cities. In the previous chapter, we covered the steps for preparing a Heritage Climate Action Readiness Assessment report to assess the city's readiness in preparing the heritage-based climate action plan. The second stage involves preparing baseline data for the city, its heritage, its climate, and the communities linked to the heritage. To start with, let's take in some key information for this stage. The key deliverable for this stage is the baseline study report. The primary responsibility for ensuring that this stage, with its associated deliverable, is completed lies with the expert team appointed as the culmination of the readiness assessment stage. Additionally, the responsibility for monitoring, review, and endorsement of the key deliverable lies with the Heritage Climate Action Steering Committee. The nodal person will be responsible for the approval of the deliverable. In terms of resources needed for this stage, human resource costs for honorarium for Heritage Climate Action Steering Committee, nodal person, experts team. Facilities resources would include an office space with needed equipment and support staff as well as data storage. Network resources would include academic and research organizations in the city, governmental and non-governmental organizations working in the area of climate action or heritage conservation. The financial outlay would amount to approximately 15 to 25 lakhs Indian rupees. And lastly, the time needed to complete all these steps in this stage is 3 months after the appointment of the expert team. Some suggested types of data that can be collected as a part of the baseline study are A. Quantitative data such as demographic surveys, land management numbers, climatic and weather-related information, economic and social survey numbers, building use, condition numbers, etc. B. Qualitative data that would include information representing observations, viewpoints, behavioral patterns, characteristics, concepts, memories, etc. that cannot be represented in numbers, may be in form of texts. C. Drawings are the documentation of the built environment based on first-hand observations recorded in form of drawings such as plans, sections, elevations, details, 3D visualizations, etc. D. Photographs are visual materials in form of the photographs that can be collected from reliable archival sources and popular media such as newspaper clippings. E. Audiovisual records such as documentaries, movies, etc. to provide information on people, place, events, processes. Please note that establishing a methodology for data collection, which includes both primary and secondary sources, is important for this stage. For further guidance on data collection, storage, and management ethics, please refer to the relevant section of the toolkit. The baseline study report involves collecting data under 4 profiles, i.e., the city, its heritage, climate, and the community. Let's take a deep dive into the types of data required for each profile now. The first part of the baseline study is the city profile. This involves collecting data about the city as a whole, and there are 4 types of data to be collected to create the complete baseline data set for the city. The first data set to be collected under city profile is the contextual data, which would include a brief history of the city, the area and demography of the city, regional settings explaining connectivity of the city to the region and rest of India, identification of heritage areas within the city, area and demography of heritage areas, and lastly, tourist footfalls in the city and heritage areas. The second data set to be collected under city profile is the geographical and geological data, which would include 1. Biogeographic zone, 2. Natural features in and around the city such as forest cover, biodiversity, natural water bodies, desert, mangrove, coastline, ecologically sensitive zones, etc. 3. Natural contour, soil character, height from the mean sea level, water table, mining or quarrying sites, etc. 4. Maps of the city, and 5. Information on probability of extreme events other than hydromet events such as earthquake zones, industrial and chemical hazards, fire hazards, health hazards, nuclear or radiological hazards, etc. The third set of data is to create a profile of infrastructure and services around heritage areas. This would include urban infrastructure, tourism or heritage interpretation infrastructure, and traditional, local, indigenous climate, resilient infrastructure, and blue-green infrastructure. The final approach under city profile is to collect data on socio-economic conditions and trends which include the social profile of the city like religions, languages, indigenous people, etc. Also, primary economy generating activities, sectors of economy, income pattern of the city, and the heritage areas also come under this category. In the heritage profile, the current stage of heritage documentation and mapping of heritage areas need to be identified. This will be based on preliminary identification of heritage areas or zones in the Heritage Climate Action Readiness Assessment Report of the city. If there is existing heritage documentation and mapping, as well as an established heritage significance, then the gaps in data need to be filled. If no heritage documentation and mapping exist, then the city has to begin from documenting and mapping the heritage assets and places. It is possible that different cities may be at different stages of preparedness of baseline data. The first action item for creating the heritage profile for the city is to list the heritage assets and places. This inventory needs to include the name of the heritage asset, legal protective designations, if any, current use, ownership, description of special features or characteristics, along with some photographs for identification. The heritage assets could be tangible as well as intangible. The exact location of the heritage assets need to be provided in a common map of a suitable and legible scale with standard referencing system or legend prepared through ground verification. The second action item is to record intangible narratives of people, community groups, various right holders, and other stakeholders through ethical stakeholder consultation methods. For the purpose of heritage climate action, the information that can be recorded as intangible narratives include 1. Narratives such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, crafts practices, festivals, events, local traditional as well as indigenous knowledge systems, culinary practices, customary management mechanisms and networks, etc. 2. Migration history, family history, community history, personal or collective memories. 3. Specific ways of land or building use patterns and their reasons. 4. Aspects of the heritage or heritage place that people associate with. 5. Narratives of issues with the place. 6. Reasons for transformation or specific actions. 7. Narratives and stories of how local people maintain, conserve, or repair their buildings. 8. And lastly, narratives describing future needs. Intangible narratives can be documented through spatial mapping techniques, participatory or collaborative mapping techniques, audiovisual or audio recordings, or as texts. The third action item is to document heritage significance, values, and attributes conveying the significance. The heritage of the city could be of varied levels of significance, such as heritage with identified significance representing outstanding universal value, inscribed in UNESCO's World Heritage List, heritage in UNESCO's World Heritage Tentative List, heritage of national significance, regional, state significance, or local significance. In this step, already established values, significance, and attributes representing them need to be listed. Data gaps in the various levels of significance need to be filled. If there are data gaps, a separate significance assessment exercise will be needed. For a value to be recognized to be outstanding universal value, it must have first been recognized as significant at local and national levels. Therefore, values are not necessary to be repeated at every level of recognition. Other heritage and conservation values can be inserted in national or local values. The combined significance of the values of the heritage area can be formulated in form of a significance statement. For further guidance on how to document the level of significance, values, and attributes conveying the significance, please refer to the format provided in the toolkit. The last action item under Heritage Profile is to record the condition of the heritage structures and places. To achieve this, a detailed condition assessment of the heritage structures and places will be needed. An inventory of all the buildings, structures, and places with photographs can be made based on an initial rapid visual assessment of the exteriors. Then, detailed condition assessments of each building, structure, and place can be done in form of drawings. Criteria for recording current condition of the attributes and their values of heritage structures and places is provided as a guidance in the toolkit. Assembling the climate profile for the city will need desk-based research, analysis from reliable data sources, and preparation of specific climate models, as well as empirical data collection, research, and analysis. In addition to data for the city, data of local climatic conditions of the specific areas, precincts, and site will also be needed. For example, climate data for the city may be available, but specific data and analysis related to the heritage sites may not be readily available, thus prompting the collection and analysis of new data. Collaboration with organizations that have specific types of data or specific types of data collection and research may be useful for these steps. For example, for the historic city of Ahmedabad, collaboration with Gujarat Pollution Control Board, Gujarat Environmental Management Institute, and Physical Research Laboratory may be useful. The first action item for assembling the climate profile is to collect information on current climate, observed climate change trends, climate change projections. Information on the current climate of the city must include seasonal characteristic of the city as well as temperature, rainfall and snowfall, wind and thunderstorm data. For example, for temperature, highest and lowest temperature in summer and winter months, average summer and winter temperatures, highest and lowest daily temperatures in summer and winter months, duration of summer and winter months need to be provided. For information on observed climate trends, observed and recorded variations or deviations in the above mentioned seasonal characteristics of the city must be collected. The deviations may be in factors such as temperature, rainfall, snowfall, wind, humidity patterns, etc. And information on climate change projections, future projections regarding the seasonal characteristics of the city must be collected. For example, expected increase in rainfall or temperature by specified year at a specific rate of change or emission scenario. The second action item to assemble the climate profile for a city includes collecting data on pollution, emissions, and other drivers of climate change for the city and its heritage areas. This can include factors such as various types of pollution such as air, water, and soil, and their causes, sectoral greenhouse gas emissions, along with their observed trends and future projections. Drivers of climate change may also include factors such as impacts of intensive mining, farming, development, and infrastructure projects, waste disposal patterns, deforestations, etc. Historic areas need to be positioned in the context of the city and its regional links. The third action item to assemble the climate profile for a city includes collecting data on extreme trends, events, and predictions. In this step, information on trends in current and predicted extreme hydrometeorological events due to varied climate change phenomena need to be provided for the city. This will include extreme events such as extreme heat, rains, droughts, cyclones, floods, etc. The last action item deals with collecting information on organizational, governance, institutional responses to trends and events for mitigation, if any. For this, the existing governance and management frameworks and responses to climate-related trends and events that are applicable for the identified heritage areas or zones or assets must be studied. This information can be collated through 3 different matrices based on various worksheets of EOH 2.0 Toolkit UNESCO 2023. For access to these worksheets and guidance on how to use them to record this information, please refer to the relevant section of the toolkit. The immediate observations or knowledge regarding key issues and comments regarding the existing governance, protection, and management frameworks can be recorded in the key issues and comments. For example, there may be gaps in the regulation of existing protective frameworks for World Heritage Sites, such as no building bylaws and guidelines to regulate the nature of building construction or climate resilient planning within boundaries and buffer zones of World Heritage Sites. A detailed assessment of such issues and gaps listed here can be done as part of the next stage of work. The community profile vertical of the baseline study serves to identify various socio-economic conditions and recent trends of the city and its heritage areas. The community profile must include a detailed community profiling of the communities living in, working in, and associated with the heritage areas and attributes in various ways. The first action item in community profiling is to identify and record varied cultural interdependencies, including social, economic, and environmental interdependencies of the communities with the identified heritage assets and their values. These interdependencies can be of various kinds, such as communities who are knowledge bearers or participants of craft practices building practices, rituals, etc. Communities contributing to or benefiting from the cultural economy of the place. The heritage area could be dependent on the temporal population or vice versa, such as tourists and visitors, migrant workers, seasonal residents, people dependent on the social infrastructure of the place, etc. Communities dependent on or impacting the natural resource of the heritage areas such as land, water, vegetation, etc. Communities with other direct and indirect interests, concerns, and influence over the heritage place. Wherever needed, maps, drawings, and photographs to visually and spatially represent the interdependency must be assembled too. For further guidance on how to record interdependencies between communities and heritage, please refer to the worksheets provided in the relevant section of the toolkit. The second action item is to identify communities and their cultural interdependencies with the identified heritage that are most vulnerable to the climate stressors of the city. The reason for their vulnerabilities need to be stated. For this, their exposure, sensitivity to the climate stressors, and their adaptive capacity to the trends and events need to be studied through stakeholder consultation and on-ground documentation. The third action item under community profiling is to identify climate-resilient resources, knowledge systems, networks, and practices that could contribute to mitigating the trends of climate change and the case of extreme events. The final action item involves collecting information on known or observed community responses to climate trends and extreme events that can be utilized for climate adaptation. This data needs to be collected through stakeholder interviews, consultations, and focus group discussions. Information can also be collected through reliable scholarly literature, which needs to be verified on ground. For examples of community responses to climate trends and extreme events, please refer to the relevant section of the toolkit. Upon completion of the data collection across all 4 profiles, i.e. city profile, heritage profile, climate profile, and community profile, all the information must be collated to create the key deliverable for this stage of work, the baseline study report. While the structure and layout of the baseline report will derive from the data sheets collected, the toolkit provides a reference format for how the report can be assembled if needed. With this, we have reached the end of Chapter 3. Continue to the next chapter to understand how the baseline study can pave the way for the next stage of work, which is the climate impact assessment. Thank you.